Carrie Rogers-Whitehead, who is the founder and CEO of Digital Respons-Ability. She'll be covering the tech part of our Burnout webinar. And then I'm also really happy to introduce to you Anna Smith, who is founder, CEO of Mindfulness Utah. Also, okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Anna, if you're ready.
All right, can you hear my audio?
Sure can.
All right, I don't know what's going on with my camera. It is not letting me turn it on, so I apologize. We might have to just go with audio for me. I don't know what's going on with my camera not letting me use it. Okay, so I'm excited to be here with you today. I apologize, I just had to log out and log back in. So Tay, I don't know if you did any introductions or anything, but I'll just kind of dive into the slides here. Glad to be, Carrie is a good friend, and we've known each other for a long time, and have kind of done some things together in the past, and excited to be here with all of you today. So just a few bullet points about me. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just doing kind of have my feet in a few different things, teaching at the community college, theory and practice of meditation, stress management classes, and then a lot of stuff out in the community, partnerships with Intermountain Healthcare and Granite School District and Salt Lake County and a lot of things like that. So the thing that I'm seeing a lot of, and one reason I was really excited to do this presentation with Carrie today is because burnout is it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere now, and it's a really, really challenging thing. So hopefully we can give you some tools and some tips and things today that will help you if you feel like you're sort of getting close to that edge, or maybe you've already sort of fallen into something that feels like burnout, that you'll have some tools and things to get you going. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, Carrie, I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Carrie with Digital Respons-Ability, and so we incorporate some mindfulness when we talk about online safety and digital citizenship, and understanding about yourself, your own emotions, how you react to stimulus on the internet is a really important part of being safe and responsible online. So we're happy to co-host this with Anna, and we love the topic of mindfulness and admire what she's done. Well, one thing that Anna didn't say is she's worked with a lot of special populations on this topic around this trauma-informed care that she's going to dive into a little bit later, which I think is really important right now because we have a lot of students dealing with a lot of stress and mental health issues and trauma. So it's a busy time, right? So we just a quick plug. We teach. We have a free webinar every month. We have recordings on our website, and we have a lot of free resources. So please follow us, follow our newsletter, and follow Anna as well and all the stuff that she's doing with Mindfulness Utah. So we're excited to dig into this topic, and we got some people from other states. It's wonderful to hear, and Anna does a lot of virtual trainings. So we do a lot of virtual trainings. We're here even if we're not in your state.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first things that I will spend some time getting into some tools and tips and techniques and things that can maybe act as a little bit of a life preserver as we navigate this really challenging time, right? That it's a really challenging time to be a person, but especially to be an educator or in the education space, so much pressure. And so what I wanted to do is spend some time before we get into some tools and some mindfulness practices that might be helpful. I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a review of what might be a screening tool, sort of a let me understand and be able to assess myself. Where am I? How am I doing? What are some of the these maybe signs and symptoms of chronic stress, of burnout, of some of these things, compassion fatigue. And so you will hopefully leave this webinar with more than just a couple of tools, which is great, but also just a greater awareness. So you can help yourself, but you can also start to be an ambassador of wellness, right? And of these education tools and how to use technology effectively and some of those things, so that you can share this with your colleagues and your peers and things like that. And I believe we're making this available as a recording afterwards, so that you'll have that resource as well, which is fantastic. So the first thing here is to dive into is just a little bit of an understanding of what exactly is stress, right? So stress has kind of, and being stressed has kind of become this very, very common phrase, and there's almost even like a badge of honor of being like super stressed or super busy. I've got so much going on, and that's something that we have to be a little bit aware of how much of this is sort of a sociological phenomenon. But then that's a little bit outside of the scope of where we're going today. But what I want to do is spend some time really understanding what exactly are we talking about when we say stress, or when we say I'm stressed, or this is stressful. And I think this, just kind of walking you through this process, we'll go through this briefly here, so that you have an understanding of, like, there is a very natural and actually very important phenomenon, or a series of effects, if you will, that are happening in the body and the brain when we experience stress. These things serve a really important purpose in our lives, and it's when they get out of control, or we're not able to kind of bring some closure to this stress cycle, that we get into trouble with our health and wellness. So let's go through this just really quickly. And this slide would probably be better illustrated if it was a circle, because this is a cycle, right? We call this a stress cycle. But there's a stress response that you probably at this point have all heard of: the fight, flight, or freeze response in the body. Really important thing. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. But I wanted to break it down just a little bit further for you. So when we're in kind of our ideal sort of calm state, we call that homeostasis. So if you think of a car that's just idling, all systems go, everything's running fine. And when we're in that homeostatic state, there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is getting a lot of attention in pop media these days, because we're starting to see, like, this is the part of the brain that is strongly associated with anxiety and depression and hypervigilance and paranoia and these sorts of things that can really throw a lot of our physiological and psychological wellness out of whack. But so while we're in this homeostatic state, this part of the brain, the amygdala, we like to think of it as the smoke detector of your brain and body. So if you think of a smoke detector, it's on all the time, right? So it's always on, but it's not sounding an alarm unless there is a fire, right? And then when it notices there is a fire, so with the amygdala, it's scanning for threats all the time. Is there a bear? Is there a tiger? Is there whatever it is? Is my boss coming in to do a classroom observation? Is that whatever your version of a bear or a tiger is in your life, right? And so it's scanning, and then when that stressor, whatever it is, when that stressor comes along, and I put a clock here because I think time is something that stresses us all out. We don't have enough of it, or when we have too much of it, we get bored and agitated, and whatever else, deadlines, doing things on time. So when that stressor hits us, this is when everything kind of goes into activation mode, and that amygdala sounds the alarm, just like the smoke detector. And so the first thing that happens is the amygdala, I imagine like a little messenger running as fast as he can to the other part of the brain, the hypothalamus, which is the command center of the brain, and saying, we have a problem. And then this command center of the brain activates all of these other systems. And this is the part when we go into the body response, or the physical response. And we'll come back to this because this is a really important aspect of understanding stress. So these are things like the respiratory system, so our breathing changes, the cardiovascular system, our heart rate changes, our blood pressure changes, all sorts of things. Blood is pumped to certain parts of the body faster and more of it, and other parts is kind of constricted. And then the endocrine system. So we've all probably heard of cortisol, the stress hormone, and the damaging effects of that. And so there are, tons of physiological things that happen in the body when we experience stress. And so if we had a little more time, I might have you think of something that is really stressful for you right now. And then you may, just sitting here thinking about it, start to feel this stress response and these physiological symptoms. And so, like I said, we're going to come back to this because there is this is one of the key leverage points of working with stress and avoiding burnout or pulling yourself out of it, is working with this moment in time when you start to feel overwhelmed by or even drowning in this physical experience of stress. I can't breathe. Sometimes it feels like there's someone sitting on our chest or squeezing, our chest or different places that really kind of put us in this place where we're like, I'm so uncomfortable, I can't function. Um, so the healthy resolution to this cycle is we move to a stress response or a stress reaction. And you can see a little man running here. And that's where we talk about fight, flight, or freeze. So this is when we say, I'm going to fight this thing. I'm going to fight this bear and conquer, and or I'm going to run away as fast as I can. Well, when you're in a classroom and your administrator comes in to do an observation, it probably is not in your best interest to try and cause them physical harm, and probably also not in your best interest to run away out of the classroom as fast as you can. Neither of those would be beneficial, right? So we have millennia of conditioning and physiological programming here that we kind of have to be aware of and work to manage in these situations. But one thing I wanted to mention here is that because in situations like that, when something comes up, most of the time, fight or flight are not really options for us, and so we are actually unable to activate there's a part of the nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. We're unable to activate that parasympathetic nervous system, which is what brings us to that last phase of recovery. And so that's a really important thing. So if there's two things from this slide that I'd like you to take away, one is recognizing that body response. So in a moment when you feel overwhelmed by stress or some of these things, burnout, take a moment and say, can I, just for this moment, celebrate that I am alive? This is what it means for my body to do this very natural and very important thing, right? And that all of my systems are functioning. It's extremely uncomfortable, but can I just take one in breath and one out breath and say, thank you, body, for being alive and for giving me this information. The second piece, second sort of takeaway here is that we can learn, and that's what I'm going to offer you here. We can learn some new skills. If we can't fight and we can't flee, there are some new skills that we can learn. And Carrie's going to give you some of those. I'm going to give you some of those, so that when we get into this state, we can say, okay, I recognize that I am in the middle of a stress response. What are my options? I do have options, and what are they? And how can I put them into play right now? And this is a lot of the work that I do falls within that one question of how can we address. We're not trying to get rid of stress, right? It's a natural thing and it's an important thing, but we're trying to get it to a manageable level. Let's go to the next slide. So there is a distinction between chronic stress, and burnout. So stress is, like I said, it's sort of this cycle that we should be able to move into and out of, and into and out of, and into and out of. And we say it takes about 17 minutes on average to go through a stress cycle. If we experience chronic stress, that sometimes falls into this category of, there's this, right now in 2020, there are a lot of unknowns and unpredictable things, and there's a lack of safety and a lot of other things that can cause us to be in this chronic state of stress and dread and, fear of the future or a lot of other things. And so that's kind of where I think a lot of us have moved into, if we weren't already there, of kind of this chronic stress state. And then when we get into burnout, that's another distinct category. And I want you to take a second and just kind of see, where do I feel like I'm in sort of a chronic stress state, or am I in a burnout state? And here's a few indicators of what burnout feels like. So energy depletion. So this is where even if you're a coffee drinker, even if you have your 1 or 2 or 3 or 12 cups of coffee a day, you're just really feeling this sense of fatigue. But an interesting aspect of this energy depletion is that it affects our sleep. That you would think if we're fatigued, we could go to sleep and sleep a lot, but that we see a lot of insomnia with this energy depletion as well. The second is a loss of productivity. So we have both absenteeism, and then also we might, in the space of education and educators, we might see actually a lot more presenteeism, where we're still showing up to work physically, but we're really kind of checked out. We're mailing it in, and that's something that I'm seeing in higher education right now too. Like I said, I'm a faculty at Salt Lake Community College, and that this is affecting educators at all levels, of just kind of, I'm here, but I'm not here, if you will. And then this is actually starting to impact. There's a whole conversation around this of how burnout affects the brain, but there are literally parts of the brain that are impacted so that our memory is affected, that we're unable to retain information, to recall information. And so, if that's something that you're feeling, and you're saying to yourself, "Oh my gosh, do I have early onset Alzheimer's or dementia or something?" You might be experiencing a symptom of burnout with that memory change. And then the third here, and this is not a comprehensive list, but these are some of kind of the key red flags, or some of the top indicators that we see with burnout, is this mental distance or negativity. And this can also come along with something we call hypoarousal, which is just this disconnect, that we feel almost numbed out, or we feel this sense of kind of doom and failure, and that is clouding our experience all the time. So going back to the classroom observation experience, if your administrator comes in and they give you some great feedback, you aren't able to really feel that. When your administrator gives you a compliment or something, there's this kind of a nice, typically pleasant response that comes in the brain and the body. And when we feel burnout, we just are kind of numbed out to some of those things. And so these, like I said, these are not comprehensive by any means, but if you're feeling like you're looking through these and saying, "Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me," then it might make sense for you to look into some additional supports, because, like I said, chronic stress and burnout are really two different categories. And so we want to make sure that you are getting the supports and the tools that you need, so that you can address these appropriately. So let's go to the next slide. So transitioning to our tools, right? So, okay, maybe we've just gone through a lot of stuff that maybe has made you feel like, "Oh man, this is terrible. All of that applies to me. What do I do?" Right? Well, let me just give you some good news. All is not lost, right? And the one really, really, really important thing to keep in mind is that right now there are a lot of things, particular to 2020, that are kind of a collective shared experience of burnout and even trauma. And so, what you're feeling in a lot of ways, physically and emotionally and mentally, is probably a shared experience. And it's an interesting time, because we are in a lot of, some of you might be teaching online, some of you might be teaching in person, with some changes to the classroom setting. But if you are teaching online and you maybe haven't seen, or you don't have the sort of the water cooler chat opportunity to sit down and eat lunch and hear how everyone is doing, sometimes we can feel really disconnected. We can feel like, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel like this?" And that can also almost make it even worse, or even harder, because we don't have that social support and that connection with others. So know that this is a shared experience, and there's data to back it up. We're all struggling. It's not just you. And the second thing to know is that there are tools, there are supports, there are resources to support you. And one of the reasons that my graduate degree is in health education and promotion, And as a health educator, I have gravitated towards mindfulness as an intervention because it is essentially free. Once you learn the technique, you don't have to remember to put it in your pocket in the morning, or pay your $30 a month for the whatever app or this or that or this gym or those sorts of things, which are all great. But this is a technique and a practice that you have all the time. You can just use your breath. You can use something that you see or smell or hear. You can use the sensations of your feet on the ground as you're walking, and that there's great research showing that mindfulness is a really successful intervention for managing stress, and even working with some of the intense symptoms of stress, some that we kind of previously discussed. So what I want to do is take just a couple minutes and kind of talk to you about what is mindfulness, so that you have an understanding of this process that we're going through, and I'd like to do that so that you can really kind of put it into practice immediately. If you'd like to, there are great apps, Headspace, Calm, and some others that have some free guided meditations and things like that. Um, and a number of other resources you can find online, audio recordings and things like that that have guided meditations and other things that are mindfulness oriented. But I want to give you these three kind of steps that are involved in any sort of mindfulness, so that you can have an understanding of, maybe how can I bring this into my classroom? How can I take just a minute, maybe 2 minutes when I have a quick break, and start practicing? And essentially, what we're doing here, before I take you through these three steps, what we're doing here is we are continuously, through mindfulness, we're training our brain, and we're actually sort of structuring the brain. We're moving that activity away from the amygdala, like we were talking about earlier, when we're constantly fretting and worrying and uh, imagining kind of the worst possible scenarios. We're kind of strengthening that part of the brain, that amygdala. And when we practice mindfulness, we're shifting our activity away from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, strengthening that part of the brain. And that's our wise mind, our creative mind, our calm mind. And so as we are strengthening that part of the brain over time, it's going to serve us better. Just like if, we do push-ups or something, we're going to strengthen parts of the body that will support us better in the future. So it's the same thing here. We're training the brain. We are strengthening certain parts of the brain that will help us to be sort of a preventative factor in our health and wellness. So the three aspects here are, first of all, we focus on something. So we're tuning in to, there's a handful of suggestions here that I've listed: the breath, parts of the body. We can tune into the bottoms of the feet as we're walking or standing or even sitting. We can tune into sounds or really anything else. I like to do mindfulness with dark chocolate, because I'm a big fan of dark chocolate. And then I get in both my antioxidants for the day and some mindfulness practice. But it's really anything that exists in the present moment. And sometimes we use the breath because it's almost got like a little bit of a rhythmic rocking nature to it that can be calming. But we essentially are going to focus on something that exists here in the moment that we can tune into with our senses. And then inevitably, as we focus, we say, okay, I'm going to do this for 5 minutes or 2 hours or whatever. Inevitably, the mind is going to wander, and you can see this little dotted line here. Mind wanders off. Oh my gosh, that student, and what I'm going to do. Oh, my lesson plans. Oh shoot, that this and that and the other. Dinner. Oh, I didn't eat breakfast. Oh my gosh, I got to go to the grocery store. Right. This is the nature of the mind, and so we don't need to say, oh, stupid mind, get back to focusing. We take that moment. That second step in mindfulness is saying, oh, my mind has wandered. And then instead of judging ourselves and getting all upset and, oh, I'm terrible at meditation, my mind, blah, we return that third step, and the quality of the return is with this gentleness, this tenderness, right? So if you think about a student who's in distress, and how you would just sort of gently guide them uh, to, down a path of safety or returned of some sort, that same gentleness, that same tenderness is what we use to bring ourselves back to the focus on whatever we've chosen as our anchor, breath, or our feet on the ground, or things like that. And we do this 100,000 times, right? This is the practice. It's like reps. If you do any sort of exercise, we're doing as many reps as we can or need to through these three steps. And that is what is strengthening the brain, is saying, okay, I'm going to focus on something. And when the mind wanders, I'm going to notice, and without judging myself, I'm going to just gently and tenderly and kindly and with patience bring myself back to my focus. And over time, what we notice is that this practice starts to apply to our life, that we say, okay, I'm focusing on a task at hand with someone, and then all of a sudden they say something, and I notice that it has made me upset. And that second step kicks in, and I say, "Oh my goodness, I'm really upset right now. Oh my goodness, I'm experiencing a stress response right now. I can feel it in my chest. I can feel it in my sweaty palms, right?" And then instead of reacting and doing these kind of knee-jerk reflex things that we end up regretting, right? We gently say, "Okay, I'm going to come back to the task at hand, to the conversation at hand. I'm going to stay in this present moment." And even if the present moment itself has components that are stressful, we aren't adding to it. We sometimes call this the second arrow, right? So maybe we've been hit with the first arrow of the person saying something, but we aren't hitting ourselves with a second arrow by complicating it with all of this extra, oh well, this is they're trying to hurt me, or this or that or whatever that we might just be making up. And so we actually simplify our life and free ourselves a little bit by creating this practice that we do in a controlled environment. And then we can start to practice it in environments that aren't so controlled, in the classroom, at home, other places, on social media, right? It's a really, really applicable practice. Let's go to the next slide. So this is an intentionally black slide because I want to do a practice with you, right? I can talk to you all day long, but the most important thing here is for you to have some experiential understanding of this practice. And so what we're going to do here is a brief mindfulness practice, and this one um, is particularly useful for, it's a trauma-informed practice is what we call it. And so I want to just say one thing before we get into this practice to introduce it. If you at any time during this practice feel uh, sort of
It sounds kind of like we lost Anna there. Carrie, should we give her a minute to come back on, or?
I don't know what just happened. I got kicked out. I'm having
There she is.
tech issues today, you guys.
Okay, perfect. We'll let you continue.
Thank you. So one thing to say about this practice, if you feel at any time during the practice that you are just overwhelmed with emotion, or it's just too uncomfortable, I want you to just drop the guidance and just tune into sounds in the room. Okay, so just any sounds, even if it's just an air conditioner or anything else, or maybe the sound of breathing, just tune into sounds until you feel comfortable returning to the practice. But this practice, like I said, is a trauma sensitive mindfulness practice. So it's particularly meant to be used when you are feeling really dysregulated, when you're feeling like, boy, I just can't even focus because I am so lost in my overwhelm right now. So hopefully this can be a little bit of a practice for you in the future. And the next slide is a script to guide you through it. So we'll do the practice and then I'll kind of walk you through it. So to begin this practice, I'd love you to just take a minute. You don't need to look at the screen, obviously, for a few minutes. So to begin this practice, I'd like you to just take a minute to check in with yourself and ask yourself this question. Where is the place right now that would be most safe and stable for you? So you might be sitting in a chair. Maybe it means closing a door, or lying down, or closing your eyes, or leaning back in a chair, or who knows what. But finding safety and stability, whatever that means right now, some safety and stability. And then taking just a couple of breaths here as you find this posture and this orientation in space of safety and stability. Taking just a few breaths, not controlled breathing, just tuning into the breath as it is. So whether it's shallow or deep, slow or fast, or just breathing. Just bringing our mind to this present moment by tuning into the breath. And now I'd like you to bring your attention to your emotions and ask yourself this question. What is the primary emotion or feeling that you're noticing right now? What is the primary emotion that you are feeling right now? The one that's most noticeable, most predominant. And if you can't identify the feeling clearly, maybe asking yourself which of the four basic emotions comes closest to how you're feeling right now. And those four basic emotions are sadness, anger, the third is fear or anxiety, and the fourth is happiness or contentment. And then once you've identified that emotion, asking yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is that feeling? So 1 being the least intense, not intense at all, 10 being extremely intense. How intense is that feeling? And now bringing our focus to this mind-body connection, asking yourself, where and how do you sense this emotion in your body? Is it in your chest? Is it in your breath? Is it heat? Is it coolness? Is it pressure? Is it ease? Is it tingling? And it might be worth taking a few moments to just kind of hold this question, just holding some curiosity. Where and how do I feel this emotion in my body? That awareness of where and how emotions register in the body isn't something we typically spend a lot of time noticing or becoming aware of. So, where and how do you sense this emotion in your body? And seeing if you can notice where it's registering in the body from a non judgmental place. So, if you notice something rather than saying, oh, I don't like that, or that's bad, or I wish that wasn't there, seeing if we can just notice it. Oh, pressure in my chest. That's there. What else? What else is here? And then finally, taking a moment to ask yourself to open up to this question. Can I be with this feeling in a friendly way? Just for this moment, can I be with this feeling in a friendly way? Can I offer myself some friendliness? Maybe even bringing online this quality of compassion and present centered attention that you offer to your students. Can I be with myself and this emotion, my experience, in a friendly way? And then as you're ready, beginning to bring this practice to a close, taking a breath or two, transitioning, maybe opening the eyes, or if you're lying down, coming back to your seat, and bringing your attention back to this shared space. Let's shift to the next slide. So this exercise is, like I said, is a trauma sensitive practice, and we call it naming. And essentially, the sort of tagline here is, if you can name it, you can tame it. So these are the steps of the that we just went through of this practice that we Typically, when we practice mindfulness, we start with the body. We get directly into the body, focus on the breath, focus on the bottoms of the feet, focus on the whatever in the body. But with this practice, the assumption here is that the body is overwhelmed by our experience, our burnout or our fatigue or our stress. And so we're actually starting with the emotion. We're saying, let's point at the emotion and let's get curious about it. So, what is the emotion? How strong is it? And again, when we're asking these questions, we're shifting the activity of the brain from the amygdala to that prefrontal cortex, and so that is kind of detangling and helping us to move into this calm, more spacious part of our brain and our awareness, and then the what we're experiencing in the mind and the body becomes workable. So, what is it? How intense is it? Where and how do you feel it in your body? And then turning towards yourself with some friendliness. Yeah, absolutely. And so, screenshot this slide if you'd like. And this, in the interest of time, this is the only practice I'm going to share with you today. But there are a lot of other mindfulness practices that you can incorporate. As a health educator, I'm all about sustainable behavior change, and I think if you focus on one thing, just pick one thing that you're going to change and you're going to incorporate into your life. And if this doesn't feel like that one thing, then reach out to me and let's figure out something else. I can get you some resources so you can pick your one thing that you can incorporate. Next slide. So the one really important thing here and kind of final note is, and hopefully you all know this, but just noticing how that you are essential workers, and that is a big, big job right now. And so recognizing and that, know that we recognize and we respect and admire and have deep appreciation for the efforts that you are putting in to kind of keep really important aspects of our society and our communities moving forward. And so we recognize that you are vulnerable to these things, compassion fatigue and burnout. So I am going to shift the microphone to Carrie. She's going to kind of talk to us about that. What is compassion fatigue, burnout? What's the difference between the two? And then looking specifically at some of the aspects of tech that we can get really smart about how to use tech so that we can work with some of these things. So thank you so much, Carrie.
I appreciate that, Anna. And I know she has to leave just a bit early. She's doing a lot of training for I think mothers. You're working with some moms here.
Yeah, mindful
Um,
motherhood class. Yeah.
I love that. Moms definitely deal with the compassion fatigue and often sometimes burnout. So I know she has to duck out a little early. We'll leave a little time for questions at the end. And if you do have a question for Anna, we'll leave, if that's okay with you, your email, like your Mindfulness Utah email, if people want to follow up with you.
Yep. I'll just type that into the chat right now so everybody has it.
Oh, awesome. Oh, yeah, this is hard work. There was a really great article, and I did include some of the stats from the New York Times talking about teacher burnout. This is something that teachers and educators are experiencing all over the place. So we're going to talk about that burnout piece, and then I'm going to talk about compassion fatigue and kind of finish up with like tech tips around how technology can contribute to more stress, but also contribute to less stress depending on how you use it. So I wanted to talk about this concept of compassion fatigue. So I actually did this presentation for a bunch of librarians. So I was a former librarian. I still do a lot of library consultant work, and I experienced this firsthand as a librarian, as a first on the ground person, just like a teacher. You're on the ground. You're working with the students. I was in a busy library branch surrounded by Title I schools and a lot of needs. And what was hard is that I was dealing with a lot of students that would come in that sometimes wouldn't have food, or they wouldn't have anywhere to go but the library. And so when I would work with these young people, usually they were young people in these traumatic situations, I developed this as a librarian, this compassion fatigue. So I felt like there were all the problems in the world that were kind of landing on my lap, and I had no training in like mental health. I had no expertise. I just was handed this as as a librarian, I learned about cataloging and collection development in library school. I didn't learn about how am I supposed to be handling trauma. I actually ended up having all these business cards, like a suicide hotline, and all of these business cards in my desk because I would have to hand them out sometimes. So I know that teachers are also dealing with this. You're working with students that are dealing with a lot of things at home. It might make you feel helpless, and we kind of absorb some of that secondary traumatic stress. So it's not happening to us, it's happening to people around us, and then we feel it. And you add on like the lack of training and support, the workload, all of it can increase this compassion fatigue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between these two. And Anna covered burnout, this environmental stressors, high level of stress for a long period of time. Compassion fatigue, you're giving a lot over a long period of time. And and I'm glad, she's talking to mothers, because I was hearing a stat from NPR that we're actually at the lowest labor participation rate for women since 1988. Women have been dropping out of the workforce because they've been having to handle remote schooling, work. Everyone's at home and they just can't do it. That's that compassion fatigue. So as this pandemic has stretched out, remember the first few weeks we're like, woohoo, let's watch Netflix and stay home. And then that stretched out much longer than 2 weeks, right? So this high level of energy and giving that can happen with teachers or parents or lots of caregivers adds to that compassion fatigue. So as opposed to burnout, you're not as, I guess, maybe detached. So Anna talked about being detached, like not feeling things at a certain point. With burnout, you're cinders, you're ash, there's nothing left to give. You're not lit up anymore. Compassion fatigue can be more of like frustration and irritability. And I remember experiencing that as a librarian. If anyone else wants to chime in about things that they've experienced, that I found myself irritable by, like a meeting would come up and I'm like, I've got all of these things I need to do, and now you want me to go to this stupid meeting, and I'd be irritable about it, and cranky about it. I was feeling a lot of that irritability and frustration because I felt like I couldn't do enough and I didn't have the supports to do enough. So as you're thinking about this, and she asked this question, are you in a stress cycle? Are you experiencing compassion fatigue? Or you're experiencing burnout? Because they're all kind of different things. Like, think of it like a spectrum that you can move back and forth, or maybe a circle back and forth between the two. But we hope that we're not getting to that last stage of burnout. I mentioned I was going to talk about technology. So in that New York Times article, and I don't know if Tate can find it and post it because it was really great. They interviewed some teachers, and a big stress, and I've seen this in surveys as well, is that a lot of teachers are having to do in-person, face-to-face learning and remote learning at the same exact time. So I've been teaching this semester at the college. I teach at Salt Lake Community College, and I have a cohort that comes to class, and then I have a cohort that never ever shows up in my class. And so you're having to teach with two different models at the same time. You're constantly following up with the people that you don't see, and you're worrying about them, like what's going on. And I felt like there's a lot of that stuff that's going on in their home. So that adds to that compassion fatigue, but it's really hard to teach in those multiple models. And it's like it increases the workload. If you're preparing lessons to be online, they're different than lectures that you do in person. And it's hard to do both. It really adds to it. So technology can increase that burnout, especially with these different teaching models. It can also increase burnout because of all the different maybe meetings we have, or emails we have, or notifications that we have. We're getting it all at once. Before there was a little more separation between the home and work, but technology has kind of blurred that lines. And when we are working so much and we're constantly being bombarded, it's really, really hard to separate the two. You never get a break. You never get to take care of yourself. You're constantly in that reactive mode. Tech stress is a big one. So here are just a few small tips, and if you have any others we'd like to share, but some other things that dealing with tech stress. Now, when I've taught this before to adults and teachers, I like to focus in sometimes on managers, because managers can make this worse. I had a manager like this, sending out emails at all times of the day. Like, you never knew when you were going to get like a text or notification or something from this manager. And that can leave you in a high stress area. That's what's hard about some of this stress is it happens all of a sudden. It hits us. It just knocks us off center a little bit and hurts. It takes a bit, as Anna said, 17 minutes to go through the stress cycle to go back. This is also, so if we can be better about sending our emails or our notifications or our meetings at certain times, then we know that this is happening at this time. And if you send me an email at midnight, I'm going to think it's important, even though it's not necessarily important. You're just up and it pops in your head. And I know I could be better up at this. Sometimes you just write and send the email just because it's in your head. But when you have employees that are already dealing with stress and then they don't know what's going to happen next from on high, that's especially stressful. You have same meetings at the same times. You send emails in batches. You don't send them all hours, and you have clear cutoffs. So I had one former coworker that I was like, wow, hats off to you, bravery there. She just wrote on her out of office reply, I will not be checking email. Stop, period. That's it. So we can't always control, of course, what our managers and administration does. We can't control a lot of these things, but we can control a little bit of our own boundaries. So a boundary that we can set is limiting checking email. So you get in the habit, and this is hard sometimes. We have all these cloud-based services over email that are constantly attached. So I turn off notifications. I turn off sound. I turn off these things on my email most of the time. So I had them popping up and that was a distraction, but I don't have them as much anymore. And I only check email at certain times of the day. So if you can manage to do that, it makes a big difference. Setting a clear communication policy, not with students and parents. I pick 48 hours. I think that's a reasonable request. You can say 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to be responding to emails because as you have more of this hybrid learning, that's their primary communication. Maybe you never see them in class. You get emails all the time. So having them understand straight up that this is when I check emails. This is when I do this. I don't do it on weekends. I respond to this way. So you can put that in a syllabus and a policy, whatever you want, and making it very clear. And they might not be happy about that. That's the thing about people. They sometimes, if they send a text, they want an immediate response, but you have to let them know that. And also, we just need more sleep. No screens in bedrooms. Put night mode on devices. I've heard this from parents. I tell them, like, don't put the phone right by your bed. But they're like, well, how am I going to have an alarm clock? And I'm like, there actually is alarm clocks that are not internet connected. So using a regular alarm clock instead of phone, because a lot of this stress cycle and this compassion fatigue and burnout can be exacerbated by lack of sleep. That just makes everything worse. It makes our amygdala react stronger and harder and makes us tired. We're also tired of Zoom conferences. I'm sure that, of course we're here, and I love meeting people and I love doing webinars, but I'll be honest, if you have so many of it, it kind of wears you out over time. So here's some tips for our video conference there. One thing that I have noticed is that I have had to use more eye drops with this pandemic because I'm staring at a screen, and it's particularly dry out here in Utah. Retain is the best eye drop ever if you can take it. So making sure your posture is better. I talked a little bit more about this in an earlier webinar that you can find on our website, or we can send it to you on how your posture and your environment affects your digital wellness. And these are some updates there. Having movement, breaks, stretch, shake, stand up, roll around, whatever you need to do. And if you can just kind of separate a little bit more your environment. As I said, we can't always control when we get messages and meetings and everything, but we can control maybe where we receive them. So you have a place allocated only for Zoom rooms, or only for this work and only for this work. And you get up, you do this, and then you come back. So I take a break at my kitchen table. I do no work at my kitchen table. It's only for like breaks and snacks. So whatever you have that you can use, take that break, because it's hard. And sometimes just being in a different physical space tells your brain, I'm on a break. I have a separation between the two, and I need a break too. So I'm going to kind of wrap up with some questions to ask yourself about tech. So I want to give some really great tips. And these are kind of almost like self-reflection tips to pause and reflect about technology. Do I need to send it right now? Who needs to be included? How can I shorten things? Are my students getting enough tech breaks too? Can we maybe relax some of the rules on if the video needs to be on or off, or the requirements of chat? Like what can we do? Because students are also dealing with a lot of this Zoom conference fatigue too, and they need to have that separation between things. So these are some questions to ask about your classroom, about yourself, and then also just as so the big thing, the big takeaway here is to take that step back and say, how am I feeling? Where are my emotions in my body? Looking and asking these questions gently and kindly. And how are we feeling? Are our emotions, is our stress level conducive? Are we putting our stress on other people, our students, or others around us experiencing this? We're all kind of, I know it's cliche, but we're all in it together. When we are stressed, when we have compassion fatigue or burnout, we give that to other people as well. So we need to create our own boundaries, have our own self-awareness. This is harder for young people, but especially doable to start creating that in themselves. But we have to often model that behavior as well. So ask yourself these questions about tech, and ask these questions about yourself. How you're doing? Check in. Text a friend. How are you doing today? How are you feeling? Just a quick check-in so we can all be healthier and we can avoid that burnout. So here are a few links of some references here, and I wanted to give a few minutes to questions or thoughts or anything that you want to add. So we have some more, and I can send you more references on mindfulness and education. There's been a lot of great research the last few years on this topic, especially as we talk about social emotional learning, SEL, and that type of work. And we're getting more and more data to support a lot of the practices in the classroom that Anna is mentioning. So feel free to put things in the chat box as well. And I don't know if Tay wants to mention some of the other webinars we're having that's coming up too. I think we have some other ones. We'd love to keep delivering these to you, and we want to help support you. It's rough out there.
Yeah, we've got our EdTech webinar coming up next week.
Yeah, so edweb.net, we're doing a parenting one as well. So how to work around with technology with parents, how to have a digital parenting night, how to communicate better, what resources to share. That's all with edweb.net. And we are working on our schedule for next year too.
All right, and I'm entering into the chat the link for you to go register for that EdWeb, or the Ed webinar. Yeah, we're really excited for that. We like working with Ed Webinar. They've been a good partner.
Yes, they have a lot of great resources as well. If you are, working on something, sometimes you can keep it in the background. I know I and tune in and out. They have archives and recordings, and we'll have recordings of this as well. A lot of great resources out there. So any other questions or thoughts before we kind of start wrapping up? Thank you, Kay, for getting that link in.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate you, all you do. I know teachers have a lot, and then you often go home and have to do it again. Or you're doing it at home all day while you're teaching. So it's really hard out there, and we're going to get through this winter. Right. Okay. Oh, thank you. I'm going to go on mute, and I'm going to start wrapping this up and stop the recording, and we appreciate you being here. So thank you.